The year was 2147, and humanity had only just begun to explore the stars beyond Mars when everything changed forever. On a quiet Tuesday morning, the skies above every major city on Earth turned dark as hundreds of massive alien warships descended through the clouds. People stopped in the streets and looked up with fear in their eyes. Children cried and parents held them close. Nobody knew what was coming, but everyone felt in their bones that the world would never be the same again. Commander Cole was drinking his morning coffee in the underground military base beneath the Rocky Mountains when the alarm started screaming. He dropped his cup and ran to the war room where dozens of screens showed the same impossible sight. Alien ships everywhere, more than 300 of them hanging in the sky like dark mountains waiting to fall. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Maya Santos, was already there with her hands pressed flat on the table and her face pale as snow. She looked at, and he could see she was fighting to stay calm. They had trained for many things, but nobody had ever trained for this. Admiral Lane appeared on the main screen with her silver hair pulled back tight and her eyes hard as stone. She was the highest-ranking officer in the United Earth Defense Force, and right now she looked like someone who had just watched the world end. She told them the aliens called themselves the Dominion, and they were part of something called the Galactic Council. This council controlled hundreds of worlds across the galaxy, and they had been watching Earth for months. They had studied humanity and made their judgment. Humans were classified as a Category 4 species, which meant they were considered primitive and fit only for manual labor. They were giving Earth 6 hours to surrender completely or face total destruction. Felt something cold settle in his stomach, but it was not fear. It was anger, pure and simple anger that burned hot in his chest. These aliens had looked at 8 billion human beings and decided they were nothing more than animals to be put to work. The ambassador was a creature called High Commander. He appeared on every screen on Earth at the same time. He was tall and covered in dark green scales with yellow eyes that had no warmth in them at all. He spoke through a translator device that made his voice sound flat and mechanical. He told humanity that resistance was pointless. They had conquered 47 worlds before Earth. They had never lost a single war in their entire history. Their weapons could crack continents, and their shields could stop anything humans might throw at them. Surrender was the only logical choice. Watched the broadcast with his fists clenched at his sides. Around him, other officers were shouting and arguing about what to do. Some wanted to fight. Others said fighting was suicide. A few suggested trying to negotiate. Maya moved close to and spoke quietly so only he could hear. She said their fleet was outnumbered 50-1. Their weapons could barely scratch the alien shields. Every military calculation said they had no chance at all. Was quiet for a long moment. He thought about his daughter who was 7 years old and loved to catch fireflies in summer. He thought about his parents who still lived in the small town where he grew up. He thought about every person on Earth going about their lives, not knowing that aliens had just decided they were slaves. Then he smiled, and it was not a nice smile at all. He told Maya they would not fight the way. The aliens expected a military response. They expected humans to line up their ships and their soldiers and fight a proper war that they would easily win. But humans had never been good at fighting proper wars. What humans were good at was surviving. What humans were good at was being clever and mean and stubborn beyond all reason. Picked up the phone and called Dr. Samuel Price at a secret research facility in Nevada. Sam was a scientist who had spent 20 years studying things that most people thought were impossible. 3 years ago, his team had developed something that the Military Ethics Committee had immediately shut down. They called it Project Nightmare, and it was designed to be used against alien biology. The committee had said it was too cruel to ever use on another living thing. Sam answered the phone and could hear fear in his voice. The scientist had seen the ships too. Everyone had seen the ships. Asked him if he remembered Project Nightmare. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Sam asked if it was serious. Using that project would be considered a war crime by any civilized standard. It was not a weapon that killed. It was something far worse. Told him the aliens wanted to enslave 8 billion people. They wanted to take children from their parents and put them to work in mines on distant worlds. They wanted to erase human culture and human history and human dreams. So yes, he was very serious. Sam was quiet for another moment. Then he said he would need 48 hours to produce enough of the agent to matter. Told him he had 6 hours to figure out how to do it faster. While Sam worked on his terrible gift set the rest of his plan in motion. He contacted leaders around the world through secure channels. Presidents and generals and scientists all heard the same message. They were not going to surrender, and they were not going to fight a war they could not win. They were going to do something they had never seen before. They were going to disappear. Earth was honeycomb with tunnels and caves and underground spaces that humanity had been building for thousands of years. Subway systems and bomb shelters and mining tunnels and natural caverns stretched beneath every continent. The alien sensors could not see through Earth's mineral-rich crust. If humanity went underground, they would not be able to find them. The order went out to every nation at the same time. People were told to take only what they could carry and go down. Go into basements and subways and caves. Go anywhere the sky could not see them. It was the largest migration in human history, and it happened in less than 4 hours. When the deadline passed and their ground troops landed in the major cities, they found something they did not expect. Empty streets, abandoned buildings, silence so deep it felt like a living thing. 7 billion people had simply vanished into the earth like ghosts. High Commander stood in the middle of Times Square in New York City, surrounded by his soldiers. The screen still flickered with advertisements for products no one would ever buy again. The wind blew trash through streets that should have been filled with panicking humans. He felt the first small touch of something he did not recognize. It was not quite worry. They did not feel things like worry, but something was wrong. This was not how conquered species behaved. This was not logical. Above him, the sky was full of his ships. Around him stood the most powerful army in the galaxy, and somehow he could not shake the feeling that he had just made a terrible mistake. In the tunnels beneath the city, Cole watched through hidden cameras as the aliens searched empty buildings. Beside him, Maya Santos was organizing the resistance fighters who would make the regret ever coming to Earth. The war had not ended. It had just begun. And humanity was about to teach the galaxy what happened when you try to put a leash on 8 billion persistence predators who had clawed their way to the top of the most dangerous planet in known space. They had studied human history. They knew about human wars and human weapons, but they had not understood what any of it meant. They were about to learn. The first week of the occupation was quiet in a way that made High Commander deeply uncomfortable. His soldiers patrolled empty cities and searched abandoned homes but found nothing. The humans had taken everything useful with them. Food and medicine and weapons had all vanished along with the population. His officers kept telling him this was good. The humans were hiding, which meant they were afraid. Afraid species were easy to control. All they had to do was wait, and the humans would come crawling out begging for mercy. Was not so sure. He had conquered many worlds and seen many species react to invasion. Some fought, some surrendered, some ran, but none had ever simply disappeared like smoke in the wind. It felt wrong in a way he could not explain. On the 8th day, the attacks began. Sergeant Danny had spent the first week underground learning every tunnel and passage beneath Chicago. He had memorized escape routes and hiding spots in places where a small team could ambush a much larger force. Now, he led a squad of 12 fighters through the old sewer system while troops marched through the streets above. They could hear the aliens through the concrete, heavy footsteps and strange clicking voices that the translator devices turned into flat mechanical words. Danny held up his fist and his squad stopped moving. They pressed against the damp walls and waited. Above them, a patrol was passing directly over a spot where Danny's people had been working for 3 days. The aliens had no idea what was underneath their feet. Danny counted to 10. Then he pressed a button on his radio. The explosion was not large. It did not need to be. The charge was placed perfectly to collapse a section of street just wide enough to swallow 6 soldiers into the darkness below. Before they could recover, Danny's squad was on them with knives and clubs and bare hands. The fight was over in seconds. They took the alien weapons and armor and dragged the bodies deeper into the tunnels. By the time the rest of the patrol came to investigate, there was nothing left but a hole in the street and silence. This scene repeated itself across the world. In Tokyo, a group of elderly fishermen poisoned a water supply that they had been using. The substance did nothing to humans but caused violent sickness in the alien digestive system. In Berlin, teenagers who had grown up playing video games used their knowledge of the city to lead patrols into carefully prepared traps. In Mumbai, engineers collapsed entire buildings onto alien positions using nothing more than patience and a deep understanding of structural weak points. The lost 30 soldiers on the first day of real fighting, then 50, then 200. They could not understand what was happening. Their shields stopped bullets and their armor resisted explosions, but humans were not using bullets and explosions. They were using cleverness and cruelty and an understanding of their own world that the aliens simply did not have. Commander ordered his troops to burn any building where attacks originated. So they burned neighborhoods and shopping centers and apartment blocks. The fires lit up the night sky for weeks. The humans kept fighting. Private Grant was 19 years old and had been planning to start college in the fall. Now, she crawled through the rubble of what had once been her high school carrying a metal case that Dr. Samuel Price had called humanity's gift to the. She was not alone. Her father had been killed when the aliens first landed. Her mother had died in the fires, had nothing left except a burning need to make the invaders pay for what they had taken from her. The case contained canisters of a biological agent that had taken human scientists years to develop. It was not a poison. It did not cause disease. What it did was much worse. They had evolved on a world where they were the top predators. They had no natural enemies and faced no serious threats. As a result, their brains had never developed the capacity for fear. They simply did not feel terror the way other species did. It was one of the reasons they were such effective conquerors. They could not be scared because they did not know how to be scared. Project Nightmare changed that. The agent rewired brain chemistry to activate fear responses that had been dormant for millions of years of evolution. Once exposed, a soldier would suddenly experience primal, overwhelming panic for the first time in their entire existence. Planted the canisters in the ventilation systems of the building, though were using as their North American headquarters. Then she disappeared back into the tunnels to wait. The effects began within hours. Soldiers who had never known fear suddenly found themselves terrified of shadows. Officers who had calmly ordered the deaths of thousands started screaming at sounds that were not there. They did not understand what was happening to them. They had no experience with fear and no way to cope with emotions they had never felt before. Some of them simply shut down and curled into corners and refused to move. Others became violent and attacked anything that came near them, including their fellow soldiers. A few put their own weapons to their heads and ended the terror the only way they knew how. Within a week, the command structure in North America had collapsed into chaos. High Commander received the reports from orbit and felt something cold crawling up his spine. He had never experienced this sensation before and did not know what to call it. His scales had turned pale and his hands would not stop shaking. He told himself it was anger. He told himself he was simply frustrated with the incompetence of his ground forces. But somewhere deep in his mind, a small voice whispered that he had finally met something more dangerous than himself. He ordered reinforcements from the fleet, fresh troops who had not been exposed to whatever the humans were using. But even as he gave the order, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Human ships, dozens of them, rising from hidden bases across the solar system. This should have been impossible. The humans did not have the technology to build warships. They barely had the technology to reach their own moon. And yet there they were, crude, ugly vessels that looked like they had been welded together from scrap metal. But they were real, and they were armed, and they were moving toward his fleet. One of his officers told him not to worry. Human weapons could not penetrate shields. These ships were a desperate gesture, nothing more. But watched the approaching fleet, and could not shake the feeling that he was looking at his own death. The humans had studied every piece of technology that fell into their hands. They had taken apart crashed fighters and broken armor and failed shield generators. They had learned how everything worked, and then they had figured out how to make it better. The first human missiles were not designed to destroy ships. They were designed to overload their shields with frequencies the aliens had never thought to protect against. Once the shields were down, the real weapons hit. Watched 3 of his cruisers explode before his eyes, and finally understood the truth that the Galactic Council had missed. Humans were not a Category 4 species. They were not primitive or weak or fit only for labor. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors who had spent millions of years fighting against a planet that wanted to kill them. They had faced extinction over and over again, and each time they had found a way to keep going. They had never fought anything like them. And they were only getting started. In the tunnels beneath Chicago, Danny listened to the news of the space battle and allowed himself a small smile. Beside him, Grant cleaned her rifle and thought about her parents and promised herself she would live long enough to see the aliens driven from her world. Above them, the sky burned with the wreckage of ships. The hunt was on. News of the human resistance spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Trading ships carried stories of the impossible war on Earth. Diplomats whispered in corridors about the species that refused to surrender. And in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, the most powerful beings in known space gathered to discuss what should have been a simple conquest. High Executor had ruled the council for 300 years. He had 4 eyes and skin like polished stone, and a mind that had guided 800 worlds through peace and war alike. Nothing surprised him anymore. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched species evolve and go extinct. He thought he understood the universe and everything in it. Then he received the casualty reports from Earth. In 3 weeks they had lost 40,000 soldiers, not to superior weapons or advanced technology. The humans had neither of those things. Instead, they were dying to accidents and traps and friendly fire, and something the reports called mass psychological breakdown. Read the details 3 times to make sure he understood. Human fighters had collapsed buildings by removing support beams over several days while the aliens lived inside. They had lured patrols into canyons and set fire to the vegetation, creating firestorms that cooked soldiers inside their heat-resistant armor. They had contaminated food supplies with substances that drove soldiers insane. One report described how a single human female barely out of childhood had destroyed an entire command center by crawling through ventilation shafts and releasing a chemical agent that made experienced warriors kill each other in terror. Set down the reports and looked at the other council members. They were all staring at him with expressions of disbelief and growing concern. Ambassador Eth of the collective was the first to speak. She was a creature with 6 limbs and compound eyes that glittered like black jewels. She had served on the council for longer than most species had been spacefaring. She told them that in 50,000 years of council history, they had integrated over 2,000 species into their civilization. Some had resisted at first, but all had eventually accepted their place. None had fought like this. None had seemed to actually enjoy combat. Representative of the Federation snorted in disbelief. He was a massive creature covered in thick gray hide with tusks that curved up from his lower jaw. His species were warriors who had conquered their own corner of the galaxy before joining the Council. He said no rational species enjoyed warfare. It was expensive and destructive, and served no purpose once victory was assured. Eve asked him to review the intercepted communications from Earth. She played an audio recording captured from a human resistance cell during an attack on a position. The chamber fell silent as the sounds filled the air, explosions and gunfire and screaming, and underneath it all voices that could only be human. They were shouting to each other and laughing, actually laughing while they fought and died and killed. One voice rose above the others, a young human male saying something that the translator struggled to convert. The closest meaning was that he had never felt more alive than in that moment with death all around him. Representative shifted uncomfortably. He had fought in many battles himself, but he had never heard anything like this. Fighting was necessary sometimes, but it was not something to celebrate. It was not something to enjoy. The chamber door opened, and a new figure entered. Doctor was the Council's most respected. He had studied over 1,000 species and could explain the evolution and psychology of almost any in the galaxy. He walked slowly to the central platform and looked at the assembled representatives with an expression of barely contained excitement. He told them he had completed his analysis of the human species, and what he found changed everything the Council thought they knew about intelligent life. The humans were from a death world. The chamber erupted in noise. Death worlds were theoretical concepts, planets so hostile that intelligent life should not be able to evolve there at all. The conditions required for a death world were so extreme that most scientists believed they could not exist. Doctor waited for silence and then continued. Earth had a liquid metal core that generated a magnetic field barely strong enough to block stellar radiation. Its climate had swung between ice ages that covered entire continents and heat waves that caused mass extinctions. The atmosphere contained a gas called oxygen that was actually a waste product of plant life and was corrosive to most organic compounds. The fauna was even worse. Earth contained venomous creatures in every environment from deserts to oceans, parasites that could control the minds of their hosts, predators that killed not just for food but for practice, microscopic organisms that could wipe out entire populations in weeks. And the humans had evolved in the middle of all of it. Doctor pulled up an image showing a human running, just running across an open plain with nothing around them but grass and sky. He explained that this was how humans originally hunted. They were not fast compared to their prey. They were not strong compared to the predators they competed with. They had no natural weapons like claws or fangs or venom. What they had was endurance. They could keep moving long after other animals collapsed from exhaustion. They would chase prey for hours or even days until the animal simply gave up and died. The humans called it persistence hunting, and it was the foundation of their entire civilization. They had not become the dominant species on Earth by being the strongest or the fastest. They had done it by refusing to stop, by adapting to every environment, by turning every disadvantage into a weapon. Doctor told them to imagine what that kind of evolution did to a species' psychology. Humans were not afraid of death the way most intelligent beings were. They had grown up surrounded by death. They had learned to accept it and work with it, and even find joy in the struggle against it. That was why they were laughing during combat. To a human, a fight to the death was not a tragedy. It was just another problem to solve, another predator to outlast, another day of persistence hunting on a galactic scale. High Executor felt something he had not experienced in centuries. It took him a moment to recognize it as fear. He asked the chamber what they recommended. They had committed their entire military to Earth and were losing. If they sent more ships from other council species, they might win eventually. But at what cost? And what would happen to the humans they captured? Could they actually be enslaved, or would they simply keep fighting until every last one of them was dead? Representatives said they should glass the planet from orbit, destroy the humans entirely before they became a bigger threat. Eth reminded him that the humans had already proven they could reach orbit and fight in space. Destroying Earth would not destroy all of them. It would just give them a reason to never stop hunting the council species. Nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand the shape of the problem. They had not invaded a primitive world. They had kicked open the door of something that had been fighting to survive since before most council species had left their own planets. Something that had been shaped by millions of years of constant struggle into the most dangerous kind of predator. The kind that never gave up. The kind that learned from every defeat. The kind that was probably already figuring out how to bring the war to council space. He made a decision that would change the history of the galaxy. They would not send more ships. They would wait. They would watch. And they would hope that the humans were open to negotiation before it was too late. Because had seen the look in those human eyes in the recordings. The look of something that had been hunted its whole existence and had finally decided to hunt back. And he knew with cold certainty that if the council pushed too hard, the humans would not stop until they had brought down everything the galaxy had built over 50,000 years. One way or another, this war was going to end. The only question was how many would die before it did. 6 months had passed since the first darkened the skies of Earth. Half a year of blood and fire and stubborn, desperate survival. The surface of the planet was with the marks of war. Cities that had stood for centuries were now rubble. Forests that had grown for thousands of years were ash. But beneath the destruction, something remarkable had happened. Humanity had rebuilt itself into something new. Captain Laura stood on the bridge of the warship Defiance and looked out at a fleet that should not exist. 200 human vessels hung in formation around her. Some were sleek and deadly looking with weapons that gleamed in the light of distant stars. Others were ugly patchwork things welded together from salvaged alien technology and human engineering. All of them were ready to fight. 6 months ago, humanity had barely been able to reach Mars. Now they had a navy that could challenge the most powerful military in the galaxy. It seemed impossible, but Laura had learned that impossible was just another word for something humans had not tried yet. Her first officer, Commander Drake, studied the tactical display with focused intensity. He pointed out the blockades surrounding Earth. Over 500 alien warships arranged in layers of defense that should have been unbreakable. Laura nodded and told the communications officer to signal the fleet. Operation Homecoming was a go. Across the solar system, human ships began to move. They emerged from hiding spots that they had never thought to check. Asteroid fields where vessels had drifted with powered-down systems. The dark sides of moons where bases had been carved into the rock. Even the debris fields from earlier battles where human ships had played dead among the wreckage. They did not see them coming until it was too late. High Commander was on the bridge of his flagship when the alarm started screaming. He looked at the tactical display and felt his scales turn pale. Human ships were everywhere. They had surrounded his fleet without making a single detectable approach. His officers told him not to worry. Human weapons could not penetrate shields. They had proven this dozens of times in smaller engagements. These ships were a threat, but not a serious one. Was not so sure. He had spent 6 months fighting humans, and he had learned that they never attacked unless they had already figured out how to win. The first human missiles hit his outer defense ships and did exactly what his officers predicted. The shields held. The weapons opened fire and destroyed dozens of the incoming projectiles before they could reach their targets. Then the second wave hit. These missiles were different. They did not try to penetrate the shields. Instead, they detonated against them and released massive pulses of energy at frequencies they had never encountered. The shields flickered and sparked and then simply collapsed. Watched in horror as ship after ship lost its primary defense. Naked hulls were exposed to the vacuum of space, with nothing between them and the human weapons, but armor that had never been designed to stop direct hits. The third wave was not missiles at all. It was the human fleet itself. Laura pushed her ship to maximum acceleration and dove straight toward the flagship. Around her, the rest of the human navy did the same. They were not fighting like any fleet the galaxy had ever seen. They were not maintaining formation or protecting their flanks or any of the other things that military doctrine said they should do. They were attacking like a swarm of angry insects, everywhere at once, unpredictable, relentless. Tactical computers tried to calculate human attack patterns and failed. There were no patterns. Each human captain was making their own decisions based on their own instincts. It was chaos, but it was chaos that the humans understood and the did not. Drake reported that 3 enemy cruisers had been destroyed, then 7, then 15. They were dying and they could not figure out how to stop it. On the surface of Earth, Sergeant Danny watched the battle through a telescope he had salvaged from the ruins of an observatory. Bright flashes lit up the night sky as ships exploded in orbit. He could not tell which side was winning, but he could see that they were taking heavy losses. Beside him, Grant counted the flashes and tried to calculate how many aliens were dying. She felt something complicated when she thought about it. She had wanted revenge for so long. She had dreamed about making the suffer the way they had made her people suffer. But now that it was happening, she felt empty rather than satisfied. Danny put a hand on her shoulder and told her it was almost over. One way or another, this would end soon. In orbit, the battle had reached its final phase. Half the fleet was destroyed or disabled. The rest were trying to retreat, but human ships had cut off their escape routes. Commander found himself alone on a bridge full of dead and dying officers. His flagship was crippled. His fleet was broken. Everything he had built over a lifetime of conquest was burning around him. A human shuttle attached itself to his hull and began cutting through the outer armor. Knew what was coming. He had seen the reports of what humans did to captured officers. They did not kill them quickly. They asked questions first. Lots of questions. He considered using his sidearm on himself, but found that he could not move. The fear was too strong. That human weapon had changed something fundamental in his brain, and now he could not escape the terror that flooded through him every moment of every day. The door to his bridge exploded inward and humans poured through. They were wearing mismatched armor and carrying weapons that looked like they had been built in a garage. But their eyes were hard and their movements were precise, and knew he was looking at the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. Danny led the boarding party. He had spent 6 months in the tunnels beneath Chicago killing soldiers one by one. Now he stood on the bridge of their flagship and looked at the commander who had ordered the burning of his city. Tried to speak, but his voice came out as a croak. He managed to say that the humans could not win. Even if they defeated his fleet, the Galactic Council would send more. Stronger species with bigger ships and better weapons. Humanity would fall eventually. Danny looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was the smile of something that had never been afraid of death, because death was an old friend. He told that was good. They were getting bored with fighting just the. Maybe the council would send something that was actually a challenge. The fear in his eyes deepened. He had fought many species across many worlds. He had seen courage and defiance and desperate last stands, but he had never seen anything like this. The human was not pretending to be brave. He was not hiding his fear behind a mask of aggression. He genuinely was not afraid. He was looking forward to fighting more enemies. Danny ordered his team to secure the ship and take the commander prisoner. They would need him later. A hostage might be useful when the time came to negotiate, or when the time came to send a message to the Council about what happened to species that tried to enslave humanity. On the Defiance, Captain Laura received reports from across the battle space. The fleet was finished. Over 300 enemy ships destroyed. Humanity had lost 40 vessels of their own. It was a price they had been willing to pay. She looked out at Earth hanging in the darkness, blue and green and white, but not broken, still there, still home. She opened a channel to the entire fleet and spoke 3 words that would echo across the galaxy. Earth is free. In bunkers and tunnels and hidden bases across the planet, 7 billion humans heard those words and wept. Some cried with joy, some with relief, some with grief for everyone they had lost along the way. But all of them knew that this was only the beginning. There were just one species in a council of hundreds. There would be more battles to come, more enemies to face, more wars to win. And humanity would be ready. Because that was what they did. That was what they had always done. Survive, adapt, overcome. And never ever stop. The Great Chamber of the Galactic Council had seen many things in its 50,000 years of existence. Treaties signed and broken, wars declared and ended, species welcomed and condemned. But it had never seen anything like the creature that walked through its doors on this day. Cole had aged 10 years in the 6 months since the invasion began. His hair had gone gray at the temples and new lines marked his face. But his eyes were clear and steady, and when he looked at the assembled representatives of 800 worlds, he did not flinch. He walked alone to the central platform. No guards, no weapons, no armor, just a single human in a simple uniform standing before the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. High Executor watched him approach and felt that unfamiliar fear stirring in his chest again. He had ruled the council for 3 centuries. He had faced down warlords and tyrants, and none of them had ever made him feel the way this small, soft creature did. The chamber fell silent as reached the platform and stopped. He looked around at the representatives, and reptilian and mammalian and things that easy classification, all of them watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt to barely hidden terror. He began to speak in a voice that carried to every corner of the vast room. He told them that they had sent slavers to his world. They had looked at 8 billion human beings and decided they were primitive, Category 4, fit only for manual labor in mines and factories on distant worlds. They had given humanity 6 hours to surrender or die. He paused and let the silence stretch. Then he told them that humanity had a counter-proposal. Behind him, a holographic display flickered to life. It showed Earth's new orbital defenses, weapons platforms and sensor arrays and shipyards that had not existed 6 months ago. It showed the human fleet now numbering over 300 vessels, with more being built every day. It showed probe data from systems the Council had thought were beyond human reach. And it showed something else. Human ships operating in space, not attacking, not conquering, just watching and talking. Talking to the species that had enslaved over centuries of conquest. Representative of the Federation stood abruptly and demanded to know what this meant. His tusks gleamed in the chamber's light, and his voice was thick with anger. Told him it meant exactly what it looked like. Humanity had already made contact with 47 enslaved species. They were sharing information, teaching resistance tactics, providing weapons and supplies to anyone who wanted to fight back against their masters. They had spent 1,000 years building an empire on the backs of conquered peoples. Humanity was going to tear it down in a generation. The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives shouted at each other and at the human on the platform. Some demanded that Earth be destroyed immediately. Others argued that attacking would only make things worse. A few sat in stunned silence as they realized what the humans had actually accomplished. High Executor raised a limb for silence, and slowly the noise died down. He looked at with his four ancient eyes and asked what humanity wanted. Told him, first a seat on the Galactic Council with full voting rights. Second, the immediate release of every enslaved species in Council space. Third, a permanent ban on the conquest or exploitation of any sentient beings regardless of their technological development. Laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed through the chamber. He asked why the Council should agree to any of this. Humanity had won a single battle against a single species. The Council had 800 worlds and thousands of warships. They could crush Earth whenever they chose. Nodded slowly. He acknowledged that the Council probably could destroy Earth if they committed everything they had. It would cost them dearly, but they might win in the end. Then he asked a question. What happened after that? Frowned in confusion. Explained. Humanity had already spread beyond Earth. Colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter and stations throughout the solar system. Ships exploring neighboring star systems. People scattered across space like seeds in the wind. Even if the Council destroyed Earth, they would not destroy humanity. They would just create billions of survivors with nothing left to lose and an eternal hatred of the species that had murdered there. He reminded them what humans did when they were desperate, how they fought, how they adapted, how they absolutely refused to stop no matter how hopeless things seemed. Then he asked them to imagine that determination focused on a single goal: revenge, against every species that had participated in destroying Earth, against every world that had benefited from human suffering, against every generation of Council citizens for as long as humanity survived. The chamber was very quiet now. Told them humans had a saying, an eye for an eye. It meant that harm deserved equal harm in return. But humans had another saying too, one that was older and truer to their nature. If you strike at the king, you had better kill him. Because if you failed, if even one human survived, they would never stop coming. They would teach their children to hate. They're great. 1,000 generations of humans raised on stories of the Council's treachery, all of them waiting and planning and preparing for the day they were strong enough to take revenge. Was that really what the Council wanted? An enemy that would never forget, never forgive, never stop? Or would they prefer a friend? He told them that humans could be good allies. They were creative and determined, and fiercely loyal to those who treated them fairly. They had already proven they could reverse engineer advanced technology in months. Imagine what they could do with proper resources and peaceful cooperation. They could help the Council explore the galaxy instead of conquering it. They could solve problems that other species had struggled with for. They could bring new perspectives and new ideas and new ways of thinking about old challenges. All the Council had to do was treat them as equals, recognize their right to exist, and stop trying to enslave anyone who seemed weaker than themselves. High Executor looked at the human for a long time. He thought about everything he had learned in 300 years of leadership. He thought about the rise and fall of empires, the cost of endless war, the fragility of peace. And he thought about those recordings of humans laughing while they fought and died. He made his decision. He told that the Council would accept his terms. Humanity would have their seat. The enslaved species would be freed. The old ways would change. But he had a question of his own. Why did the humans not simply demand more? They had the Council scared. They could have pushed for territory or tribute or any number of concessions. Instead, they asked only for freedom and equality. Was quiet for a moment. Then he told something that the ancient leader would remember for the rest of his very long life. Humans did not want to rule the galaxy. They did not want to conquer or dominate or control. They just wanted to live, to raise their children in peace, to explore and create and build something lasting. But when someone threatened those things, When someone tried to take their freedom or hurt their families or destroy their home, then humans became something else entirely, something that did not stop, something that did not forgive, something that would burn down the whole universe to protect what they loved. He extended his hand, a human gesture of peace and agreement. Looked at the hand, such a small thing, 5 fingers in a palm and nothing else. No claws, no armor, no natural weapons at all. And yet it belonged to a species that had just humbled the greatest power in the galaxy. He reached out and took the human's hand in his own. The chamber watched in stunned silence as the two leaders shook hands. It was a moment that would be remembered in history books across 1,000 worlds. The day the Galactic Council finally learned that some species should never be underestimated. Through the great windows behind them, Earth hung in the darkness of space. Blue oceans and green continents and white clouds, beautiful and fragile and somehow still there after everything that had tried to destroy it. Cole looked at his and allowed himself a small smile. They had done it, not just survived, not just won. They had changed the galaxy forever. And this was only the beginning. Humanity was free, humanity was strong, and humanity was never going to be anyone's slaves. Not now, not ever, not while a single human heart still beats somewhere among the stars. The war was over. The future was just beginning. And for the first time in a very long time, humanity faced that future without fear. Because they had learned something important during those dark months of occupation, something that the galaxy would never forget. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the fastest or the most advanced. But they were the most stubborn, the most creative, the most absolutely unwilling to accept defeat. And that made them the most dangerous thing the universe had ever seen. The Galactic Council had learned that lesson the hard way. They would not forget it. And neither would anyone else. Ever again.